Hey everyone, welcome back to Road Reg. On today's video, we are going to be going through, and I'm going to try and keep this short, all of the modifications that I have made to my M140i from start to finish in one video. So this video is for the new people to the channel that haven't sort of been following my journey with the M140i and just want to know quickly, relatively, what mods I've done in total, because obviously most of the modifications I've made to my M140i are not really visible. They're sort of hidden mods, and those are intentionally hidden mods. So let's start with modification number one. That was the Remus catback race exhaust. Now, when I say race exhaust, that just means that both resonators are cancelled. I think you can get a normal Remus catback exhaust with just one resonator, but I got the race version, which meant there was no resonators. There's basically no resonators in this exhaust system, which is why it's so aggressive, which is actually, you know, back then I loved it and was really excited by it, but I have to admit, as I'm getting a little bit older, it can be a little bit loud, especially in the mornings, and I do feel slightly guilty for my neighbours and apologetic. So yeah, I think obviously I bought this car 5-6 years ago, put the Remus exhaust on when I was sort of in my mid-20s, and I loved it. But if I was making that modification now to this car, I probably wouldn't have gone with the race exhaust. I would have gone with just the normal one, because the race exhaust is loud. Remus exhaust modification number one. This modification, you'd never be able to find it unless you looked under the car, and that is the underbody brace. Now, the reason why I did this is because when I was driving the car, when you're pushing on, whether that's going around a roundabout, exiting a roundabout, pulling out of a tight junction, those are times when you're going to feel the chassis work on the public road, yeah? Unless you're going into bends at 3 times the speed limit, you're not going to be pushing the chassis that hard that you can feel it. You know, tight corners are where you're going to feel any sort of imperfections in the chassis. You could really feel a disconnect at the back of the car, and I didn't like it. Didn't like the way it felt, and I basically, as soon as I had the money, I went and got that sorted, and I'm glad I did, because it made a huge difference to the way this car feels. It made it feel more connected. Now, this one is sort of 2 modifications but kind of rolled into one, because they were done at the same time, and basically that was the Motech springs and spacers. When I say the Motech springs and spacers, I have to explain to you. Motech collaborated with IBAC to make their own spring for the M140i, which is pretty cool. It had its own spring rate, and it was a custom height that you couldn't just buy normally if you were to just go for the IBAC Pro kit. Me being a bit pedantic and OCD, I wanted to keep it the same brand, so I bought IBAC spacers, and I basically bought the IBAC spacers in the same spec as the Motech spacers, which were 12mm at the front and 15mm at the rear. The Motech IBAC springs were 25mm at the front and 20 at the back. If you were to go on the IBAC website and buy the same springs, so I think it was called the Pro kit, they would be 20mm at the front and 15 at the back. So this was using Motech's own spring that they developed with IBAC, their own spring rate and their own sort of height, should we say, specification for the M140i. This was back in the day when the M140i was very new and they were selling like hot potatoes. Joe Achilles was, I mean, he's on his A game now, but he was really sort of heading sort of the YouTube game in the M140i department. You know, if you ever spoke about M135i's or M140i's, most people, if they were enthusiasts, would know who Joe Achilles was. And I remember watching Joe Achilles take his mineral grey M140i Shadow Edition to Motech to get that kit done, and I was inspired basically. It was a very, very cool time back then. And yeah, so that was modification number 3. On to modification number 4, the Bilstein B8 Dampers. Now, prior to me fitting these dampers on my M140i, I did run the Motech IBAC springs on this car, along with the eye-back spacers, and unfortunately in doing so, running those springs with the stock dampers just highlighted how poorly set up those dampers are for a stock M140i. Now, I'm sure on a smooth German A road they would be just fine, and in fact I have driven the car in Germany several times on the stock dampers and springs, and it was okay, it wasn't awful. But when you lower the car 25mm at the front and 20 at the back on the stock dampers, and when you're pushing on especially, it really highlights that the rebound on these dampers is just too fast. It doesn't settle over small bumps, and I really struggled with pushing on with this car, with having this car feel sorted and stable. In fact, when pushing on, this car would feel a little bit skittish and unsettled, which as a driver doesn't inspire much confidence. But thankfully, the Bilstein B8 Dampers completely transformed the ride of this car, and I've had passengers tell me this several times, and you feel it. You really, really feel it. It's one of the most significant changes I've made to this car. It just made the car ride smooth, and it can handle those undulations and little bumps and stuff in the road that were really poorly highlighted on the previous dampers. Yeah, Bilstein B8 Dampers with those Motech eyeback springs, terrific setup. They absolutely transform the ride of this car, and actually when you go back into an M140i without these dampers, you can really feel that difference. And I did a video on this. I did a A/B test of the original dampers on the same road at relatively the same speeds, and you can just see me bouncing up and down. Those dampers are just not right for this car. Bilstein B8 Dampers, fantastic modification. Obviously, we all know this car came with an open differential, whereas like the M2 came with a limited, well, all M cars come with a limited slip diff. And when I say all M cars, I mean full fat M cars. The M140i isn't a full fat M car in any way, shape or form. It's what's classed as an M-Lite. And I think this term was actually coined around about that time when Joe Achilles had his M140i. I mean, I could be wrong here, but yeah, that term was sort of developed for M performance cars because they're not full M cars. But not having a differential made this car feel very scrappy and not really synonymous with the M badge on the rear of this car. It should have come with a differential, in my opinion. So I went for the M Performance differential, which is a clutch-plated Drexler differential. I could have gone for a Wave Track or a Quaife, but I really wanted to keep it OEM, and I wanted to put the same differentials that the M cars have on there. The Offspray version 3 intake pipe. Now basically this pipe replaces the OEM pipe. I'll try and insert a picture for you here so you can see what I'm talking about. Now that pipe has a huge box sticking out on the end of it, and that is a resonator box. It's designed to cancel out the frequencies from the intake noise. I want intake noise. This is a turbocharged car, so I want it to sound turbocharged, but BMW being BMW, and in the interest of refinement, which I do appreciate them on, they make these air boxes quiet, so the car is refined and quiet, you know? I wanted a bit more noise from the intake. I didn't want it to sound like a Nissan Skyline on full boost. It wouldn't really reflect how much power this has, and it would draw a lot of attention to this car, and it already draws quite a bit of attention because of that Remus exhaust. So I wanted just a little bit more intake noise, so I installed that Offspray intake pipe, and alongside that I also popped in a K&N panel filter. Modification number 7, this is a really quick one, is the Ultra Racing strut bar. Now look, I'm going to be honest with you guys, I did that for no other reason other than looks. At the time, I kind of justified it as it would complement the underbody brace, and it kind of does. But I tell you what, you could take that thing off right now, I wouldn't notice a difference. But because it's white, it matches the car, Alpine white. So yeah, there is one final modification that I've done to this car, and that is Michelin PS5 tyres. You might not think that's a modification, but this car came with Michelin Pilot Supersport tyres, which is a star-marked tyre for this car. But hey, I have done plenty of videos about tyres on this car, and my opinion on the Supersports is out there on the channel. For the people that haven't seen those videos, basically the Supersports were amazing in the dry but hideous in the wet, and the inside and outer edge would wear out prematurely, leading to tyres needing to be changed far quicker than they should be. I don't think they were quite right for this car. What I've got on now is Michelin Pilot Sport 5s, which I actually think are the perfect tyre for this car. I mean, they weren't around when this car came out, so it's a bit of an unfair comparison, but these Pilot Sport 5s, I consider it a modification to any car. You put these tyres on any car and it is going to feel instantly better. Period. The end. End of story. That is a fact, I promise you. Thank you so much for joining me on today's video, and I hope this video helps you, whether you have an M140i now and you want to make it better, or you're thinking of buying one. Yeah. Thank you very much. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe to Road Reg, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.